everyone. Welcome to the webinar, The Future of Business. Where will we be by 2020? I'm Jason Fell, Director of the Entrepreneur Partner Studio. Our webinar today is presented by Sprint Business and Entrepreneur, and it will cover a topic that's critical to all entrepreneurs, regardless of your industry or your market. We're going to be discussing the top tech trends impacting businesses over the next several years. You know, from hardware to software to services, everything else, technology is coming at a breakneck pace right now, and all these changes, let's be honest, can be really hard to keep up with. Good news is we have an expert panel here today to make sense of it all for you and for your business. I'd like to introduce you to our host, Gene Marks. Gene is President of Sales and Marketing at the consulting firm, the Marks Group, and he's a longtime friend of Entrepreneur. Gene, tell us about who our experts are, and let's get started.
Jason, thank you very much, and everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have a good time. Jason said that we can take about 3 or 4 hours to do this webinar, so thanks, Jason. I'm just kidding, everybody. We're not going to take that long. This will be an hour. We will finish on time. The way that this webinar will work, everybody, is after I introduce our esteemed panelists, we're going to jump into a conversation that's going to go for about 45 to 50 minutes or so, depending on how things go. And then I'm going to ask you, I'll remind you during the course of the webinar, by all means, submit your questions in the question pane that you've got, I think, on the right of your screen. Jason will be diligently tracking all questions that come in, and then in the last 15 minutes or so, we'll put some of those questions to the panelists so we can talk about some of the trends that are out there. So again, my name is Gene Marks. I run a technology consulting firm called the Marks Group outside of Philadelphia. We sell primarily CRM applications like Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics and Zoho and a few others. I also write for various publications, including weekly for Entrepreneur on entrepreneur.com. So very happy to be here and happy to talk with two very, very interesting guys. So I'm going to start with Ivo first. Ivo Rook. Ivo, can I ask you to say hi and introduce yourself and say who you are?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Gene. Pleasure to be here. My name is Ivo Rook. I have recently joined Sprint to build a complete new IoT offering for the US market, but also in very strong cooperation with the SoftBank Group. As probably some of you know, the SoftBank Group is the owner of Sprint, and the SoftBank Group is a big investor in IoT and technology, robotics and AI. And it is my humble task to first build the IoT offering for Sprint here in the USA, but also to combine it with the capabilities of the SoftBank Group and make sure that all the entrepreneurs that we invest in have a capability to distribute their services through our IoT network and cooperate with them.
Great, thank you very much. And Tom Andriola, please, a brief background of yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Gene. So, hi, my name is Tom Andriola. I work for the University of California System, so most of you probably know our 10 campuses. But overall, we're actually a $33 billion enterprise in the businesses of education, patient care, so healthcare, and agriculture, in addition to our public service mission. And in my role as Chief Information Officer, I get a very, very broad purview helping university leverage technology strategically to support the mission, which allows me to play not only the operation of technology, but using technology innovation and creating commercialization opportunities off of our technology insights.
Perfect. That sounds great. So, yeah, so, the title of this presentation is called, Where Will We Be by 2020? So we're looking ahead 2 years. Of course, we all know that the Eagles will have 3 Super Bowl wins by then. So that goes without saying. But really, I'm from Philadelphia. But this conversation is about technology, and we want to talk about where technology is going. So we've got 2 guys, both Ivo and Tom, who are your jobs are to look ahead at technologies and how they're going to not only shape in your organization, but in Ivo, in your case, clients and customers of Sprint as well. So these are some of the big, you guys should all, everyone on the audience should all know there's lots of technology trends that are going on. We only have an hour to have a conversation. So we're going to narrow it down to these 4 broad topics. We want to talk about the Internet of Things and how they're impacting businesses and what you should know and what you should be on the lookout for. We want to talk about robotics, both in the factory and in our lives, and how that type of technology will be affecting us. Drones and autonomous vehicles. We read about the driverless cars all the day, and we're reading about autonomous trucks as well, which I think will have a giant impact on how goods are shipped over the next decade or so. And so we want to have a little conversation about that. And finally, artificial intelligence and software bots. This is, all sorts of ways that software makers are automating how we will conduct our communications and our transactions with our clients and with our companies. So all of these things we're going to discuss over the course of the next hour or so, and hopefully give you just an idea of where this is going and how this is going to affect your business. So the first thing that comes up is the Internet of Things. So I like to throw out some data so everybody kind of gets a little bit of context here. I'm not going to bury you in lots of stats and all of that, but there's 11.2 billion connected devices in the world, expected to go up to 20 billion, almost double by 2020. Only 1% of this data that's being connected is actually being analyzed. And Dean Conway is the CEO of Illuvium. It's a large consulting firm in the business, saying that organizations are going to be moving from making investments in digital infrastructure to making investments in digital literacy. A lot of data that's out there that's being captured by things. And just so we know, when people talk about the Internet of Things, we're talking about really putting a brain on a dumb piece of hardware. The ultimate Internet of Things devices are smartphones, which have brains in them. But technologies are now evolving that's putting chips on all sorts of different things that are then able to capture and relay data so we can do things with that data. So Ivo, I'm going to start with you. Tell us about how the Internet of Things is evolving. Where do you see it going? How do you see it impact our audiences, businesses, and their lives?
Yeah, so first of all, one of the things that I believe we should all realize is that though these evolvements and all these evolutions and revolutions that we see in technology at some point may be overwhelming, I do want to basically say and remind everyone of the fact that the future is only unpredictable unless you shape it yourself. All of these big changes in technology that we see taking place are actually right at your fingertips right now. And if you're an entrepreneur and you can shape your own business, and even if you're a small or a medium entrepreneur, you can actually shape your business much quicker. It is actually turning the odds in our favor as entrepreneurs if we can adapt quickly and embrace some of these technologies. And the thing with IoT, the Internet of Things, is that, first of all, it's not as new as many people think. We've been able to capture data from machines for years and years and years already. We've just not been listening to the machines as a total part of sensors that give us information. I mean, fridges, televisions, power sockets, all of them have been connected for a long, long time. They have their own fault codes, they have their own language. We've just not found a way to really listen to them. And that is now the first wave in IoT. We found a way to listen to these devices, to capture that data, but that was the M2M wave, is where we found a way to transform the data that comes out of a piece of hardware, essentially, and then collect that data. But then what? What we then need to do, and that's the essence of IoT, is you need to turn it into intelligence, because otherwise we'd just be sucking data out of a machine. But what does that really mean? And we need to turn that into intelligence immediately, which means that you need to bring it into context. Because what one fridge is telling you is less relevant what a million of fridges are telling you, or cars, or medicine, or whatever it is. So you need to be able to turn that into intelligence by bringing it all together and processing that data and putting new layers on it. But essentially, we still haven't accomplished anything unless, and that is the real test we need to put ourselves to, is with this data that we now receive, do we actually impact lives? Do we change things that we do? Do we change the way we operate? Do we create tangible little benefits for the people, our customers, ourselves? If you don't listen to these things and execute upon them, then IoT just is another way of spending a lot of technology money. So my big message is, don't be afraid to capture the data. It's simple, but focus on turning it into immediate intelligence by working with software, but always ask yourself the real question: does my data have impact on the way I work, my business operates, or people live?
And Tom, I'm going to turn to you in a minute, but Ivo, we're talking about lots and lots of data that can be captured by machines, by farming equipment, by your cars, by anywhere, depending on what your business is. I mean, it seems like an enormous job to have to do this. Are businesses going to have to hire more people, do you think, in the future to track all this information, or will there be software or tools to help them do that?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we need to be hiring an enormous amount of people just to capture the data. Capturing the data, meanwhile, most of the machines that are being produced have a chipset in it, and to capture it through a module, through a cellular or a Wi-Fi network should be easy. If you hire people just to do that, then I believe you're making a mistake. Where I would, however, invest in is hire people to be able to work with the intelligence that comes from the data. And again, the software tools out there are plentiful. I wouldn't spend too much time writing code to build own AI. There are plenty of those available. But actually, I would hire the people to say, okay, with the intelligence that we now capture, how can we optimize the way we work? How can I change the way I work? How can I disrupt my own supply chain and find new revenue sources? That's where I believe you need to focus your attention to, rather than to learn how the technology works itself.
That's great. Now, real life, Tom, let's talk about some examples. I mean, where do you see, Internet of Things being used, this technology, in the real world today, and where you think it's going to be used over the next few years?
Yeah, I like to, I have to say that I totally agree with Ivo's comments, and I thought the best thing to do is maybe give a couple of examples that we are living through right now. So, in healthcare, for example, we take care of a lot of patients. We have close to 4,000 beds in our hospitals. We see over 4 million patients and outpatient visits every year. And we estimate that we're only using about 5% of the data that we capture today. It's really amazing. So for all the data that we have in healthcare, we're actually a very small sliver of it to actually make decisions on behalf of our patients. And then when we started looking into this more deeply, we started focusing on what data are we actually using for decisions, what data do we have, we actually realized that we had data that would be very valuable for us to take care of patients. Things as mundane as how much did the patient eat? Because that becomes a driver of whether the patient is well enough for us to discharge them from the hospital. That we actually realized that we needed to redesign the data capture mechanisms that we have across a patient's visit at the hospital to get data that's more relevant. So more data isn't necessarily better. It's relevant data, high fidelity data that actually drives our ability to find insights into it. And we've started using this concept of we're building a corpus of knowledge around what we do in healthcare, and that every piece of data that we collect, we ultimately want to figure out how to use to make sure that the next patient we're taking care of, we can do a better job than the last patient. If I hop over to one of the oldest industries we have in the world, agriculture, as mundane as agriculture is, you're talking about an industry that's going through a tremendous change impacted by the technology forces that we're talking about here. We talk about IoT, you talk about sensors, you talk about drones in terms of mechanisms to be able to now collect data in the form of images, and that data is being used from the standpoint of going from, well, we need to spray our fields for pesticides, for pesticides to take care of the pests. We need to spray this field. We need to spray this zone within this field with this particular pesticide for this particular pest that we saw through the drones that are flying throughout the valley. Right, so you're talking about, again, being able to really use Internet of Things through a variety of different mechanisms to be able to say we're more targeted and we're more personalized in our approach to operating, in this case, our farm, which is our business.
I have a few farming clients, and they've got sensors that they put along the rows where they're planting crops, and the sensors are sending back data as the moisturization and the water content of the soil around the crops. So they could literally see, if a certain portion of the field is getting less saturation or less water, than another sense. So they know, oh, we need to focus, more water over in this area rather than that area because it's, it's drying out quicker. I also see that in actually in MLB stadiums, a lot of the grounds crews are now putting sensors all underneath and around the turfs so that way they can better track, which areas of the field are needing the most kind of, water and whatnot. How about this one, guys? There's ThyssenKrupp, which makes elevators, all around the world. I was reading, this is a Microsoft study, how ThyssenKrupp is putting in sensors in thousands of their elevators, so that from a central location, not only them, but all their building manager clients can actually see the elevators in action and determine if an elevator needs repairs or if it's running faster or slower than it should be or any type of anomalies. That I thought was really interesting as well. Ivo, any other things that you'd like to add as far as Internet of Things, technologies, and how you see it, impacting businesses?
No, I just think we need to all be acutely aware of the fact that there's hardly anything you can't digitize anymore. You can digitize something as small as a credit card, as big as an elevator, as deep into the ground in an agriculture field, and so on. It's just very important that we all realize that basically everything can now be measured, and that in itself is not the biggest change. And again, we always need to ask ourselves, what do we do with it? But there's hardly any industry anymore that is not in some shape or form impacted by the ability to digitally measure context and input on a continuous basis, which basically means if you're an entrepreneur, you need to know that you're working in an area where you basically have the possibility to know everything. Now, what do you do with that?
That's awesome. All right. So, okay, enough with Internet of Things. Well, actually, not enough. There's plenty more to talk about there. But let's move on to another topic, and the topic has to be all about robotics and how robotics are affecting industries and individuals as well. Again, throwing out some data to you guys. By 2020, 30% of the top 100 retailers will be using robots in the ship-from-store process. In 2017, 34,000 robots were ordered, a value of $1.9 billion. We're expecting growth to be about 20%. And industrial robots, you can see the third piece of data on the right-hand side, is supposed to exponentially grow as well over the next few years. Not all robots, by the way, are successful. I wrote recently about how there was one friendly robot. Some stores are putting in robots that greet customers and say hello. And there was one chain in Japan that was using one of these robots to do that. And the robot started saying all sorts of inappropriate things, or acting in a weird way, and it was turning customers off. So we may be on the way, and I've got two slides here that sort of sum up, where robotics is going and what they're all about. Now, Ivo, you provided these to me, and so let me know when you want me to switch to the second slide. But let's start with this one about the future is here. Walk me through what we're trying to explain here.
Yeah, what I'm going to try and to put that into a data center, the same amount of processing power as a human brain would need 2,000 tons of, it would weigh that much, and it would need 20 megawatts of power, which is a couple of power machines. And the problem, therefore, has always been that whilst our intelligence as humans, we have it immediately present, actually the data centers could not be as mobile, and therefore robots couldn't really work with the amount of processing power that we had. Actually, if you look at it on a speed point of view, that's actually already won by the science world and the computer technology, because actually computers are much faster than the brain. Here again, the explanation is purely physical and science. It's because the brain works with chemical reactions, who are just a little bit slower than electric pulses or fiber optics. However, because of the weight advantage and the power consumption advantage that men have over robots, men always have been much quicker, lighter, more finesse in the touch. And that's about to change. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'll try and explain to you why. Because today we reach at a point where networks, not just Sprint, but SoftBank, Vodafone, AT&T, Verizon, all big operators in the world will explain you the same thing, is that networks are starting to reach a speed within which the interpretation of data can be turned around into intelligence within less than 10 milliseconds. With the 5G that is around the corner, will be rolled out in 2019 already, what we're going to be seeing is that a robot will achieve intelligence speeds that are just like humans. Humans need 150 milliseconds reaction time. Hearing is 100 milliseconds reaction time, and all of this with interpretation of the brain. Touch is 20, and the only organ directly attached from the human body to the brain is actually the eyes, and the eyes work with 10 milliseconds. That's your own personal version of edge computing. Now, why is this relevant? Is that because with the processing happening in a data center that sits somewhere in the world, but the robot sitting somewhere in another part of the world, now utilizing the processing power from centralized data centers, but being able to be quick, intelligent, on the spot, without having the weight or the power disadvantage, will mean that we can now teach technology how to work with people rather than with people how to work with technology. And with that, the barrier between robots and people will start to disappear. And that means that there's more symbiosis and can more be obtained, and people and robots will be able to work together. It may not all be androids as we see right here in the middle, but what you'll see is an enormous exponential takeoff of robotics in first the production world, but also in the interaction with humans and people.
Ivo, so I have a couple quick questions for you on that, and then Tom, I'll turn to you. But first of all, this webinar is all about technology that's going to affect us in the next couple of years by 2020. How long do you think this time span is going to take to get to the point where you say robots will almost be like humans in their interactions?
First of all, it's happening right now already. If I told you earlier, I mean, we, with the SoftBank Vision Fund, we've created an investment fund of 100 billion. In there is companies such as Boston Dynamics and companies such as Cloud9 that are working artificial intelligence and robotics and bringing them into business already. If you look at Amazon, how they have automated their warehouses and achieving phenomenal efficiency with it. If you see how much robotics is already inside productions of cars, where actually more is done by robotics than it is by humans in terms of the production, but also the interaction between people and contact center with chatbots and so on. It is not something that is happening in 2 or 5 years from now. It is actually starting to happen right now. As a matter of fact, as I told you earlier, the 5G is around the corner. We are building a dedicated IoT core network that is directly connected to the radio networks of operators that will allow technology to be interpreted and turned into intelligence within 20 milliseconds already next year. So you see that this is something happening today.
And fascinating enough, and Tom, I'm going to turn to you with this question because what I read and what I hear from certain futurists, and I don't want to give a dystopian view of the world, but these robots, when you look at this picture of this robot standing next to a man, and Ivo is talking about how obviously the computing power of that robot is getting quicker and quicker, where it's almost equal to what a human brain is. Then there's the cloud that gets involved, and when you think that as networks get faster and faster, Tom, these robots can be connected to the cloud, like computers are connected to the cloud today, which means that robot that's standing next to that human being could have access to information immediately that's a million times beyond what any human being could ever access. And again, without taking a dystopian point of view, Tom, how do you see that impacting, say, the healthcare business or other industries when you have that kind of power, potentially at your fingertips?
Yeah, so I think I would change the tense of your verb there, right? How is it changing the healthcare industry? I love Ivo's segment here, right? Because I agree with them. It's not as far away as people think. What is potentially far away is our willingness to adopt into our lives and our businesses these capabilities that are becoming more and more proven out every day of the week. And that's where early mover advantage comes in. But these things are there. I mean, working at at a set of research universities, I get to see a lot of these. I work with the Berkeley lab for robotics, and every time I see that group, I'm like, so what are you teaching the robot to do today? I mean, it's peel a banana, right? It's peel a banana. It's pick an object out of a bin. It's and so this whole kind of mindset shift of I use this very simple everyday example. It's cutting a potato in your kitchen to put into your dinner, right? We work through, as Ivo said, right? It's our eyes see the potato, we take the knife, we have a fine motor skill of being able to chop the knife, all driven by the speed of that and the accuracy of that, and not cutting our finger off is driven by our brain and our senses. And so now you give it to a computer and you disconnect these different pieces of the robot's hand can move a lot faster, right? The cloud is being able to do all the calculations, so we don't cut our finger and we cut just exactly the precision of 10 millimeters apart of the different slices, and they can do it at 10 times the speed. It just doesn't happen within a physical body. The pieces of the activity are disconnected a little bit, brought all together by the network, and all of a sudden you now have something that you see in all of those futuristic movies about what the robot does now, cooking all of your dinner as a personal assistant. Right. So these things are all kind of right there. I have a slide. It's funny. I'm looking at this slide with the robot and the individual sitting next to each other. I have a slide that I use when I talk about the emerging or the evolving role of the CIO, where I have a similar thing where I have the robot and the person sitting at a desk, kind of working collaboratively side by side. And my question to the audience is which I explain that one of them is the CIO and one of them is the deputy CIO. But I say, which one is which in 2025? Right? I mean, are we at the point where the decision-making capability is actually faster and more informed by the robot because you now have the ability through networks and the cloud to access anything that's ever happened in any Fortune 500 corporation's IT organization, because you have access to all that knowledge, where in the person you only have access to that person's experiences and the number of conversations that they've had about others' experiences.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
Where is this going, and then how has it come to integrate in terms of being able to support one another?
All right, that is fantastic. Very interesting. Let's move on to our next big trend that's affecting us both personally and professionally, and that's drones and autonomous vehicles, which we made mention of it a little bit earlier in a discussion about Internet of Things. But when you look at certain statistics, certain things like 94% of traffic accidents involve driver error. Just imagine if you have cars that are programmed to drive, that obey the law, that keep the right speeds, that monitor traffic, that can do all the things and processing even beyond what a human being can do. We know our largest shipping companies and retailers, Amazon, UPS, FedEx, all are investigating using drone and robotics delivery methods. We've seen a lot of that in the news. And in 2017, 3 million drones were shipped. 7 million are expected to be shipped by 2020. Americans, people worldwide have a great interest in drones as well. It's a technology that is continuing to get support and is growing as well. Ivo, the next two slides do come from you, and we're talking here about, again, autonomous vehicles, drones, how these things are done. Tell me a little bit about what this slide is saying.
Well, first of all, I think autonomous needs to be seen in the context of a profound change that the whole automotive industry is coming and going through. I mean, there's three key trends that are shaping that industry. Number one is electrification. That's happening as we speak. The number two is the connected car. Of course, no car is individual anymore. Any car already can be looked at from a distance, will grab navigation data, but also can be looked at from a distance when there is an accident. We will know within a split second what happened and so on, which are all considered good things, of course. And then if you combine it with the robotics and the AI that we discussed, I mean, autonomous is the big third trend, and it is happening, and it will have quite a lot of impact. First of all, why is it accelerating? It's because of the fact that through AI, we no longer have to build an autonomous car. No, what we actually need to do is we need to build a car who knows how to learn how to drive. This is the big change through neural networks. This is why the likes of Google suddenly are going faster than the classic automotive industry, because they work through a different paradigm. They don't need to teach a car how to drive. They just teach a car how to learn how to drive. And that's why they're putting millions of collective kilometers on the streets already. But what we see as well is it's shaping a big opportunity as the entire supply chain for the car industry is changing from a parts-oriented supply chain to a platform-oriented supply chain. So we go to the next slide. Nobody debates anymore that the new car will look something like, if we can flip to the next one.
I'm working on it.
All right.
Here we go.
The car looks like this. And there's two things that you should realize here is that is a fraction of the amount of parts that is in the car, which of course means that there's less companies providing towards it. But most of these cars will now be used in a platform way. Today, the economy that sits behind Uber, that sits behind ride sharing, is already so big that actually getting into the automotive business, where the asset of owning a car is part of the platform business, is lowering the threshold of getting into transportation. So that again represents a very big opportunity for other people who are going to utilize cars in a different way, changing business models, which again will mean that there's more room for investment to accelerate the key three trends of connected, electrification, and autonomous. So in that perspective, just assume in that way that the networks will be able to let the autonomous car driving. Don't think this is something that's going to be further out in 2025. As a matter of fact, today already we're working in projects such as in New York City, where we have automatic, we've demonstrated it a few weeks ago, where we had a charger, which is a robotic charger that actually comes to your electric car. So no longer the electric car needs to look for a lading station or docking somewhere. No, you go into a car park, there is a little robot, it drives automatically because it notices that an electric car has entered the parking lot. It comes there to your car, you just plug it in, and then afterwards the robot just unplugs itself and drives back again to get charged again, by the way, through the sun. And these are pilots that are happening today.
So you're saying, though, that the car itself becomes a platform and all it needs is really the software to run it, so that businesses, rather than having to rely, say, on shipping companies, they could build their own forms of transportation to ship goods and do it much less expensively than what they're doing now. Does that make sense? Am I understanding that?
Yeah, absolutely. What we'll see is a couple of things. Is the capital ownership of a car is changing, where today individual ownership is basically leasing it through a company. But if you think about it, today in an Uber model, the asset of the car is owned by the driver. But if they go towards more autonomous models, where the driver will have either no function or a different function, because there will be different jobs out there, of course, then actually the ownership of that then flips back to the Uber company, who will then make those available for the users directly. So the whole ownership model of cars will be changing alongside of the technology.
Fascinating. Uber itself, which loses right now about $1 billion a quarter, its entire business model is reliant on the development of this technology for the very reasons, Ivo, that you're saying, so that there can be shared vehicles that are driverless. They don't have to have that cost of the driver, that transports people and things all over very inexpensively. Tom, what are your thoughts on all of this, as well as any thoughts you have on the future of drone technology or even autonomous trucks?
Yeah, so I think so. A couple things come to mind. Right? I mean, we have a couple of campuses that are on the forefront of this, and campuses are in themselves small cities, and so two of our campuses have formal agreements in the whole autonomous vehicle space, doing the type of pilots of transporting people around, using the vehicles more as platforms. We've also seen some of the robot comes to you to plug the car in. So we're seeing some of those things. Again, this whole concept that Ivo's talking about the unbundling of the concept that we've all grown up with around what a vehicle is and what transportation is I think should be very exciting to a lot of entrepreneurs who have been around this space and are thinking about a way to transform what their current company does or the next company that they want to create. One thing we haven't really mentioned about that's just kind of an overall trend is how much of the new technology development is being made available also in kind of the open source space, so that people can go out and grab base components and then build unique differentiated pieces on top of that. Very different from the first wave of technology that we had through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where so much was proprietary that was done. Now you have so much more that's open source that you can grab, and so you can almost envision a future, which you put Uber out there, put Tesla out there. You say the car is a platform, or there's a transportation vehicle which is a platform that you can build function and software on top of it, and I can pick the best that's in the marketplace to put those combinations together for what I want to do with that transportation mechanism this weekend, which might be just tool around the city, but it also might be go for a drive up to the mountains and go skiing. And that all now becomes, somewhat configurable for me, and it creates a personalization experience. So I think if people start to wrap their head around, there's a completely different way of thinking, like Ivo's articulating. There's a lot of opportunity for the future of business in transportation.
Yeah, Tom, it's funny. It's like, Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist, said a few years ago how software is eating the world. And that seems like another example of this, doesn't it? I mean, you're saying that, you can take configurable parts of a car, and as long as if it's open source and you've got the right, resources on hand to develop, an application to have that vehicle be what you want it to be, you can do anything with it. It's a good time to be a software developer, don't you think?
I always seem to start my presentations with, it's never been a better time to be in the technology business, and it never ceases to amaze me how it continues to be true, and it always even seems to be even better than it was 5 years earlier.
Yeah, I believe that. Well,
yeah, by the way, Gene, if I can build on something what Tom just said there, because earlier you asked also for our audience, right? What should we be investing in? Should we be hiring people? Right. I think Tom hit at something super relevant. Today, when you're an entrepreneur, you need to know about open source. It is changing the way that people spend their money, capitalize labor today is more attractive than, and rather than to buy hardware, you can take that in a hosted service and then invest time to understand the open source and then capitalize your labor, how you can stitch it together. I mean, the balance sheet of companies is changing. This is an area where I would recommend entrepreneurs spend more time understanding. If you don't, you miss an opportunity.
That's such great advice. And listen, I mean, not all of us are, can be software developers, but to at least make yourself available to have the resource to do that kind of development for you is critical, I think, for most businesses in the future. I think in-house software developer, or a team of them will be as important as your accounting team and your sales and marketing team, regardless of what business that you're in. Which brings me to really our final big trend, which of course has to do with software, and that's AI and software bots. Tom, they're all over the place, right? Only 15% of enterprises right now are using AI, but that's going to change. Business leaders saying that it's going to grow. It has a big business advantage. These technologies are going to impact them. Tom, you're in the healthcare world. My healthcare AI story is that I use, I have CVS as my pharmacy, and we use them for medications. We have a rescue dog who has all sorts of, you don't even want to know all the medications we're giving this dog, and I get text messages from our local CVS store that says, oh, your dog's medications are coming due. Do you want to refill them? And I'll reply yes, and then I'll get a text message back saying, your vet has to approve it. You've run out of refills. Can we contact them? And I say yes, and then they text me back saying we've contacted your vet, and they approved it, and do you want to get it? And yes, and they confirm. All of these text messages going back and forth, Tom. And I know I'm not texting a human being, am I? I'm texting a software bot, right?
Pretty good possibility in today's world, right? Yeah. So I think if you look at this space, right, it's moving equally as fast as the others that we've talked about. AI is a term that it means lots of different things to lots of different people. To me, I like to look at AI as being just a host of technologies and capabilities. We might be talking about natural language processing, speech recognition, visual recognition, biometrics, machine learning. It could be a lot of different things, right? But we're talking here about kind of the impact of business, and to bring it back to really just simple terms is, every business is going to be dealing with more data, which they're going to be trying to figure out how to generate deeper insights around so they can make better decisions and drive greater levels of personalization, whether that's personalization internally to make the best decisions or better personalization for the customers that they serve so that they can build more loyalty and maintain those customers, grow new customers, get more wallet share, whatever it might be. There's so much going on in here that we've kind of already touched on, and just in terms of, there's the computational power of the cloud and the ability of using the network to bring things together. But I like to go back to Reid Hoffman's statement of, he called it human data indexing. That's like, the data now is not just about, kind of the bits and bytes of business and what's going on in our supply chain, but the computation ability we have now around what we traditionally think is data, biology, and chemistry is something that we've never been able to do before. This concept of, and in healthcare, that what that gets into is that we understand, I'm actually doing some work right now that we would consider research because we haven't figured out how it's going to play into the market, of connecting people who work on food science and chemistry with biology and health science from the standpoint of what is it that I really eat that affects the health going on inside my body. Not wait till I'm diabetic, but if we're going to drive healthcare around wellness, how do we connect food science and understanding of now computational chemistry with computational biology? And maybe for you, carrots and broccoli are the right vegetables. And for me, it's snap peas, cauliflower, and kale. And actually knowing the difference between those two and creating wellness plans and dietary direction that shape your trajectory towards long-term wellness different from mine. And so in this type of possibility, we didn't really have until very, very recently, and how we bring it together. Organizations like Geisinger in Pennsylvania, who do a genomic profile on every patient now because it's so inexpensive, and be able to say, we're just going to check you for, 17 rare diseases that have a genetic biomarker that we can immediately tell you, that you have this, and maybe make a lifestyle change that will delay the onset of the disease, right? Artificial or machine learning algorithms that actually predict the diagnosis around things like mammograms better than a mammographer, someone who's gone to school for many, many years. It's very, very scary to clinicians, as you can imagine, but this is also where things are going. And, Google gets a lot of press for the things that they do, but literally every day I read about another, kind of study where just this morning I was reading about something done in Germany. They trained on 100,000 images for to basically do what a dermatologist does.
I just saw that.
Skin rash. I can't go by a day if it's not diabetic retinopathy. It's something in dermatology. It's something in radiology. Pathology is coming on very, very quickly. So these things are all, kind of very, very interesting. Let me give you another example of chatbots, because it was mentioned earlier in the education space. Some people may have seen this, in the audience. I'll give two examples. One was at Georgia Tech about a year ago. They had a master's computer science class that they had set up a chatbot as a TA, and they basically, for all the students in the class, because it was an online class, their master's program that's online, they were interacting with the TA, and the TA was answering questions. And it was only about week 12 of the semester that someone said, "Are you a human or are you a computer?" Because, the number of questions that it was able to answer was actually very, very high, because when you actually look at if you look at the data, 80% of the questions, are basically very routine and repeatable. And so they are actually able to cover quite a number of questions through the chatbot. We have a university colleague over in Australia who is basically, through their website, everything behind it now is a chatbot. It happens to be powered, in this case, by IBM. Right. But they're able to answer 80% of the questions that are basically, it's like, how does financial aid work? What's the admissions process? What's the deadline? What are my housing options? And they're able to do this behind the scenes, right? So you think about the labor productivity opportunity, because that's one of the things that AI gets focused on, is what's the labor productivity is. Take care of the routine thing very, very easily. We have something, a little pilot at UCLA that came out about 4 or 5 months ago, where a radiology resident, so this wasn't even someone who's completed their education, is going to be a radiologist, one of the areas that might be disintermediated first by artificial intelligence and machine learning. He wrote a chatbot because radiologists get very, very similar questions from other clinicians who are seeing patients. It's like, saw this in the image, could you point this out? Well, he put a little chatbot literally over a couple of weekends, introduced in the environment, and had about 200 basic questions that it was responding to, and it basically halved his normal workload of disruptions of just answering questions from clinicians throughout UCLA. And it was just a really, really cool example of just how someone with a little bit of basic knowledge and understanding of the environment could actually make quite a impactful productivity gain.
It is amazing.
And real simple. Yeah. Unfortunately, we hopefully will keep him in the system, and we won't let one of the technology companies hire him away. But it just shows an example that these things, and he used it using the open API from, I think it was Amazon.
Wow.
I think it was what he downloaded from the open source world, as Ivo articulated earlier. So it shows you that, the more, we're only at the beginning of this whole thing. The more we continue to capture the digital footprint of our environment, whether it's about our personal environment or what's going on, in the business setting, the more we integrate that data together, extract meaningful insights for decision-making purposes, learn through experiences, which is what machine learning is all about, is the fact that, we looked at 100,000 images, read by people. We fed that into the computer, and now the computer has learned from everything that those 100,000 specialists have understood before them. And now we can do everything going forward as an A/B test.
Right.
It becomes very, very impactful, and you're going to see breakthroughs, but you're also going to see now new expectations of consumers based on these experiences, where there's now a new bar in terms of performance or
I'll tell you what I'll be ultimately impressed is when we can combine all these technologies with a robot using artificial intelligence and even autonomous vehicle technology to just answer my kids, take them to their soccer games, make sure that they've got all whatever questions that they have, we're giving them the right responses, and then that way I can kick back and watch a little Netflix. Then I know that all these technologies will converge into actual real good use. We're talking about AI and soft robots and all these related technologies. Internet of Things, Ivo, in just a minute or so, and then I do want to get to some questions that I know we have. Just, again, a real life example. I mean, I understand Sprint is sponsoring this, but it is just one of the many companies out there that are offering sort of technologies and solutions to help businesses leverage these types of trends. What do we mean by the IoT factory?
Well, basically for us, this is the answer, because I can imagine that most of the things we've just spoken about, people will think, well, this is massive, this is such a game changer. How can I possibly, as a smaller entrepreneur, start to begin to understand how all of this works? And we thought, well, then our strategy should be to democratize IoT, make it simpler.
Right.
Because ultimately, everybody gets into IoT for three reasons: either to adhere to regulation, or to take cost out, or to create new revenues. So basically what we've launched is a digital factory. It sits behind SprintIoTFactory.com. And basically what it does, it gives ready-made, super simple IoT solutions that you can just order, plug and play. You don't have to worry about connectivity. It is all pre-configured. Give you a simple example. If you're a restaurant owner, wouldn't you want to know when your fridge drops a certain temperature or rises the temperature too much? So basically it means something is wrong. And by the way, if an individual restaurant owner would lose the stock of their fridge one time, that is a month worth of profit gone. You order something, you throw it in the fridge, and it just gives you a signal when something is wrong. It can be that simple. Yep. And to make sure that we keep the community actively thinking about the simple little things, the website also has more than 500,000 developers that basically challenge each other to build new IoT solutions. So you can also develop your own IoT solutions by taking a few sensors, writing a very simple code, using open source completely. It spits out a SDK. For those who know what that means, is it basically is a skeleton to build your own app. And before you know it, within a few hours, you can build your own IoT solutions, because ultimately, nothing changes unless we make it easy for people to use. And that's what we're doing there.
That's awesome. All right. So listen, we have a few minutes left. Great conversation. Jason, I know you're there. You've gotten some questions in. Let's see if we got a few minutes to answer some questions. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah. Thanks everyone for submitting so many great questions. Let's see. So this one I'm going to paraphrase just because we got so many on the same topic, right? It's about security. With technology evolving so fast, as business owners, what does everybody need to do? They're collecting and managing all types of data about their business, about customers. What do they need to know about security? Can all that stuff be hacked? Can information be misused?
Yeah, so Tom, let me throw this out to you first. I mean, come on, all of this is 100% secure, right? No problems there, right?
Yeah, give it to the CIO, right? Thanks. Look, I mean, there's security and there's privacy, in this conversation. Information security is a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. We've started to finally accept to ourselves that working closely with the cloud providers is a heck of a lot better from a security perspective than thinking that we do this well ourselves. Put it with people who do it at scale. So we become pretty let's say skewed towards leveraging them more and more, especially around sensitive data assets. It's taken us a while to get there, and a lot of companies kind of go through that. Are they comfortable letting someone else own their data? But you have to start thinking about how well do you really do it? How much resource can you really afford to put to it with your business? Right. On the privacy front, it's very interesting. We have some really thorny issues that we're going to grapple with as a society, going forward, and that's going to drive its way into policy. I think what you've seen recently is that business has gotten ahead of the law, and you're seeing the public backlash from that. And it'll be a constant evolution of the equilibrium about what people are comfortable with and what the law is trying to do to quote unquote to provide the proper level of safeguards. You know, here in the U.S., we're all kind of reacting now to GDPR, the new European legislation that just went in, which is a higher bar than what we've ever had here in the States, but impacted us because so many of our businesses are global. So, you know, I just think that, you know, we've got some interesting roads ahead. You know, we've put a lot of thought behind, especially in the healthcare space, about the balancing the use of the data, which people may or may not be comfortable with what the mission of our organization is about creating better health care for people in general, and that we have an obligation to do it in a way that's, you know, that's responsible, but also, you know, is necessary for us if we really want to improve the quality of lives for people. So there's going to be a balancing act that's going to continue to be kind of on the forefront of every one of these conversations. That's
great. And Ivo, what about you? I mean, what you must get these questions from Sprint customers that say, hey, you know, how secure is my data, and you know, what are my risks here? What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, I think that the security, as most of these challenges are pure technology challenges that we can solve, and it is a balancing act. Of course, we ourselves work at securing everything at the chip level, so we're going for a physical perimeter. We do that together with a sister company, ARM, that basically has a design that sits in 90% of the chips, so we'll be able to authenticate and make sure that we know that the IoT device is who it says that it is. I also want to say that in terms of privacy, we also should let ourselves be led by some proper ethics. Very often, because it becomes a technology debate, people make it more complex than it has to be. Privacy is something that we need to cherish. We need to utilize the same technology, AI, to warrant the privacy of our consumers, and we need to protect it, not because regulation wants it, but because we ethically think it is worth protecting. And if we let ourselves be guided by that, then I actually think we're going to be fine. Also on the physical security, there's always a trade-off between security and convenience. I mean, everybody's got windows in their home. That doesn't make them necessarily more secure, but there is a level by which people will actually prefer convenience and comfort over security. So I'm not downplaying the security challenge, but I'm saying it is part of this world, and there will always be very, very good, strong technology, big companies out there, but also small companies who can put an absolute secure perimeter around this. And there will always be people who will testing it and trying to break it. And that dynamism will probably exist for a while. But overall, the benefits of technology by far outweigh the risks of security.
And now there's a guy who has answered that question before. Don't you think, Tom? Jason,
absolutely.
That's a great response. Jason, what other questions we got? Or do we have time?
Yeah, well, we can always make time, of course. Well, so after security, another topic that was brought up several times in the questions was jobs. A lot of folks were wondering if you guys can just kind of touch on the fact that, well, I don't want to say the fact that, but like how possibly AI and IoT might replace certain jobs or jobs at risk. How do you see that playing out over the next 10, 20 years?
Okay, good question. I think this will have to be our last question. But Tom, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're running the IT for a huge organization, and listen, you want to control your resources, and I'm sure you're using IT to to keep overhead low, which in many cases means job issues. So what is your take on how all of this affects future employment?
Yeah, so I mean, it is going to have, I think, a pretty dramatic effect on unemployment. Just like every technology wave that we've had in our society, and I don't mean just technology in a classic sense, but the Industrial Revolution had a tremendous impact on society that doesn't was job related, but it changes the whole demographics of where people lived and income levels, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think this is just going to be like what every big wave is. And I think we're talking about, a revolution that's like the Industrial Revolution, like the information revolution, in that there's going to be jobs that are going to go away. There are going to be new jobs and new industries that are going to be created. People are going to have to be mindful of those changes and hopefully be proactive to move to where as they say, where the puck is going, skate to where the puck is going. I just think this is a natural source of living in a capitalist society in terms of progress will move with or without people, and people need to be ready to seize the opportunity when it's there for them.
That's good. Allocation of resources. Jason, I think we're out of time. So I want to thank both of our panelists. Great conversation. We could have talked about this for a lot longer, but just really great insights. We appreciate it very much. Jason, thank you so much for moderating this. Entrepreneur, thank you for sponsoring this or powering it, and of course Sprint, thank you for sponsoring this as well. Jason, any final thoughts?
I thought you said it was going to be 3 hours. What are you talking about?
We're just getting started.
Gene, thank you so much. Thank you so much again to our speakers, Ivo Rook from Sprint Business and Tom Andriola from the University of California. Wow, thank you, Sprint Business. Without you, this webinar would not have been possible, and it was a great webinar at that. And we couldn't do this today without everyone attending. Thank you for all the attendees today. Thank you for being so engaged. We look forward to speaking with you all again on another webinar very soon. Take care.